Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books, and today I'm here to talk about all of the books that I read in January. So let's get right to it. In January, I read a total of 10 books. I'll put some stats up on the screen so you can see the breakdown of some of the things that I'm tracking in my reading. I'm using a spreadsheet this year, as well as using Goodreads to help track some of my reading. Goodreads just doesn't, track everything that I want to keep track of in the books that I'm reading. So the first book that I finished in January was Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. This is, I suppose it's my second Margaret Atwood book, although you'll see that I've actually read a couple of Atwood books this month. This one was really good. I buddy read it with my friend in South Korea, and we both really loved the way that we've got a completely unreliable narrator in this story. If you don't know the story of the book, you have a murder, a grisly murder that has taken place. By the time we get to the story, this is years afterward. The young woman who committed the murder at the time has been in jail, but there's a lot of questions about whether she committed the murders or not, and whether she was basically manipulated into maybe participating. So the whole time we're looking through the eyes of the psychologist that's trying to figure out, whether she did this or not, and then also hearing her tell the story to the psychologist. The tension building in this book was just so well done. The time, going back and forth between the time of the murders and the present, was wonderful. The character building was amazing. There are no true good characters in this book, which I really enjoyed. And I've been really enjoying that kind of complex character building that some authors are just so good at. So I haven't watched the series yet, but it's on my list of things to watch. So hopefully I will get to it soon. But this one was just a very good read for me. All right, the second book that I finished in January was Barack Obama's biography, actually part one of his autobiography, or memoir, A Promised Land. This is a chunker. I had the pleasure of reading this book with two of my siblings, and it was wonderful because we had different takes on it. For me, right off the bat, I felt like Obama was being super long-winded, which is a characteristic of his that we all know. He can be very long-winded, very professorial at times, especially when he was talking about things dealing with the economy, which I was not super interested in hearing all this detailed backstory to it, primarily because I felt like he was trying to excuse and some of the decisions that he made, and I felt like, listen, it's done. You did what you did. I want to hear why you did what you did, but I don't need a super detailed backstory to it. The book is at its best, I think, when he's giving us some of the behind-the-scenes look, the way the staff at the White House, behaved towards him, what they told him. His explanation of his first meeting with certain world leaders were super fascinating. All of that behind the scenes stuff was actually really nice to hear. And for the most part, this book is not going to change your mind about Obama or really anyone in his administration, except for at the very end, there's a story he tells about Claire McCaskill and her position on DACA students that really warmed me a lot more than I have been to Claire McCaskill. She is not one of my favorite politicians, but his description of what she did really made me look at her in a different light. So there you go. Barack Obama's The Promised Land. Huge chunker, by the way. All right, the next book that I finished, Why Learn History When It's Already on Your Phone by Sam Wineburg. And this is a book I'm using in my a class for basically future history teachers. And it really goes into depth about some of the issues that come up when teaching history, like standardized testing and how we teach historical thinking, the traps that we can fall into, and some of the best practices for it. So this is a book that I think will be of interest not just to people who are future history teachers, but anybody just interested in history and the way we approach it. There were a lot of really useful things in this book that I didn't know about. For example, some of the problems with standardized testing. Like, I already knew standardized testing was problematic, and it contains a lot of racial bias within it, but it's also just a terrible testing method, and the book delves into all of those issues in here. So I think it's good for just the general public to know some of these things, because sometimes we end up voting on these things, and because politicians and the decision makers when it comes to curriculum really listen to us, the public, and we're not always better and well informed on some of these topics. The next book that I finished in January was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. This is the third and last book in the Poppy War trilogy. And The Poppy War was one of my favorite books that I read in 2020. And The Burning God was such a fantastic conclusion to the story. I had the pleasure of buddy reading The Burning God with Priscilla over at Bookie Charm. And I just love the way she approached this book, because while we have a lot of similarities in the things we like, Priscilla is also somebody who, whenever I buddy read something with her, she always brings such a different perspective, and it's really great to kind of bounce ideas off of her and to examine the same things with her. So for those of you that don't know, I can't go into all the plot of The Burning God because it's the finale in a series, but it's the story of Rin, who was this kind of poor peasant girl from the equivalent of rural China. It's a different country here, but it's a stand-in for China. And she's got darker skin, and she's trying to claw her way into this military academy. And she makes it, and then still, there's all these barriers to her. And it's basically the story of someone's descent into violence and war. And it's a character, I love her because she's a character you want to root for because of her origin story, because of her beginning, but at every step of the way she's making choices, and a lot of times being pushed into choices that are not good. And I love, again, this kind of ambiguous characters, and in a lot of ways Rin's character is not very ambiguous. She's not a hero, she's not a heroine. And so, and yet, her story is super interesting, and you want to follow it, and you want to see what's going to happen to her, and you want to see what's going to happen to the people around her. The next book that I finished in January was a super quick read. This is History, Why It Matters by Lynn Hunt. I read this in under a day. It took me a few hours. It's really short, and I don't know that I would really recommend this one necessarily for a general audience. If you're interested in kind of the history of history, this is a really good summary of it. And then I thought about, something like this would have been useful when I was a graduate student, except it touches on a lot of themes and doesn't delve deeply into any of them. So I think it's somebody who's interested in kind of historiography and wants a very accessible introduction to it. But it's just that quick summary. It's not going to delve deeply into any of these topics. The next book I finished in January was The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. This is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. I read The Handmaid's Tale a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. I love that book because, and in fact have used it in class because of the themes of reproductive rights and women's role in society that book explores. Still extremely relevant today, but this sequel was really unnecessary. I enjoyed parts of the book because you get a little bit of the backstory of Aunt Lydia, one of the like aunts in the story. Women are divided into these different groups in The Handmaid's Tale, so you get to delve a little bit more into the origins of Gilead. But I don't think the point of views were necessary. The Aunt Lydia's point of view was interesting, but still not interesting enough to sustain the whole book. And at the end, she has an author's note that talks about how the book is supposed to answer a lot of the questions that she kept getting after writing The Handmaid's Tale about, what happened to Gilead and how the regime collapsed. And I didn't need that. I just totally did not need that. The Handmaid's Tale works on its own with all its ambiguities and unanswered questions. It just works, and the Testaments did not work for me. The next book that I finished in January was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I buddy read this with Shannon over at That's So Poe and Cousin at Always Doing. I will link both their channels down below, and actually I'll link everybody I've talked about down below. And this is a classic, a kind of gothic classic. And I'm so glad I read this with Shannon and with Cousin because they each brought such different perspectives to the same material, and I really enjoyed just those discussions. So if you don't know, this is the story of a young woman who is in the south of France as a lady's companion. She's a poor young girl, and she's working as a lady's companion. In comes this rich man who offers to marry her. She accepts, and off they go to his estate, Mandalay. And it turns out there's a lot of darkness, a lot of things going on because his ex-wife, or his late wife, she is dead, was beloved in the community, beautiful, well known for these lavish parties that she threw, and yet the whole estate is like under a black cloud. And it's about this young woman navigating that world, a world of wealth that she does not belong to, a world in which it doesn't seem like she can always trust her husband. We're never sure what is happening and who is super trustworthy. And what really made the story for me, though, was the ending. The last bit of the book, the last few chapters, kept you on the edge of your seat. But I liked the whole my overall enjoyment of the story was really high, even though most of the story is very slow paced and nothing really happens. You just, you get descriptions, we're living inside the narrator's mind, so we're seeing all her thoughts, how she processes every little thing, and so there's not a ton of plot. But lately I've really been enjoying these kind of atmospheric books where not necessarily you don't get a lot of plot, but the writing still excels. And that's really odd for me because while I can appreciate good writing, good atmosphere and character building, I usually need plot in order to enjoy a book. And lately I've been finding books where there's not a lot of plot, and yet I enjoy it. And I think actually in the buddy read, I was the one who enjoyed Rebecca the most. So I'm going to link the videos in which Cousin and Shannon talk about this book down below, so you can go take a look at a more critical view of it. Because especially I think Shannon really had a feminist interpretation of the book, and as through that lens, didn't like a chunk of this book, but then she read the afterword, and then her mind kind of changed because it offered a different way of looking at the novel. And so I think that her review is really worth it. And then I just watched Cousin talk about Rebecca, and I really love the way Cousin talked about it, and I think it's completely worth your time to go take a look at those reviews because they tend to be more critical than I am. Once I enjoy a book, I'm just like, oh, I loved it. And I think you really want to get different perspectives if you're thinking about going into this book. All right, the next book that I finished in January was Root Magic by Eden Royce, and I really loved Root Magic. It is set in like the civil rights era, but a period in a southern town where the police are really bothering this particular family. And we get a sense at the beginning that there's a backstory there, because the dad has disappeared, like he left the family, and that presents some problems for the kids. This is a middle grade story, so we're seeing all through the perspective of these two young children who are trying to navigate this world in which their mom has taken on a lot. She tries to shield them from a lot, but they also understand, they understand that the police is not there to help them and the dangers that puts them in. At the same time, they know through their grandma and through their uncle that their family is connected to magic, to the world of magic, through the different kind of herbs and plants and things that they collect and rituals around it. And they want access to all of that, and their mom has allowed that, has allowed her uncle, their uncle, to teach them and kind of induct them into this family tradition, which is very important. And then the world just shifts, right? And I was just loved looking at this through the eyes of children, especially through the young girl, and how, she's also learning that while her brother and her share such a strong bond, that the fact that she is a girl means her experiences are going to be very different. And in that, and they're at the age in which her brother is trying to, kind of find male friendships and doesn't maybe need her as much. And all of it is in this, this world in which magic is real, and that they are learning about it. And it's just really, really wonderful. I love middle grade books, and this is an example of how they can deal with really difficult topics, do it beautifully, and do it in a mature way that is accessible to the age group. I just cannot say enough wonderful things about Root Magic. I think it's meant to be a series, so I cannot wait to continue reading along. So the next book, second to last book that I finished in January, was Island Queen by Vanessa Riley. This is Vanessa Riley's first kind of historical fiction book. She's typically a romance writer, a historical romance writer. She writes in the Regency period, and I was really interested to see what she was going to do with historical fiction, and wow. I'm going to have a dedicated review of this book later on once it's ready to come out, because I read an arc that I was able to get through Netgalley. The book actually doesn't come out until, I believe it's June or July. I'll put all the information down below. But this is the story of Dorothy Kirwan Thomas. And Dorothy was a real person. So the story is based on a lot of reality. And in fact, Riley did an extensive amount of research on Dorothy. Dorothy was a woman who was born a slave to a slave woman and a white slave owner. She earned her freedom. She worked, saved money, was able to earn her freedom, the freedom of her mother, and then she ends up freeing her entire family through just sheer determination and hard work. She's in the Caribbean, so we get to see the world of the Caribbean, what it looked like during this time period, in which the slave trade's about to be abolished, but there's still a lot of slave trading occurring, and you get to see the kind of power the slave masters have, especially over women, over black women, and the precarious situation that puts them in. This story, though, is about just female determination, female power, and the men that come into Dorothy's life are like, oh, so good for nothing. In a lot of ways, they really just present roadblocks in her journey. She becomes one of the wealthiest women in the Caribbean, and I just cannot say enough good things about how Riley wrote the story, though. Like, it's all in Riley's writing. The story is amazing on its own, but in the hands of somebody else, it would have fallen apart. And like, oof, I'll limit myself here because I'll do the dedicated review of it, but it was just freaking fantastic. And please go take a look at the story, pre-order, put it on your TBR, all of that. Okay, the last book that I read in January was Eugenie Grandet by Honore de Balzac. So this is my first Balzac. I actually did read Balzac in college. Yeah, because I was a history and French major, and so I had to take French literature, and we read excerpts of Balzac, but this is my first full novel by him, and I absolutely adored it. It's set in the 19th century, and you're following this rural family that is very wealthy, and nothing else really happens. Like, there's not a lot of plot here. The main kind of disruptor in the story is that, and for this family, the Grandet family, is that the cousin from Paris comes and visits them and completely upends their world. But really, it's the character study of this family. It's about greed. It's about female piety, and like the big little choices we make in our lives and how they end up shaping who we are, the trajectory of our lives. It's a critique of like rural living in a way that is not, like, in a lot of ways when authors, especially at the time, the 19th century, try to critique, rural people, they often talk about them like they are caricatures and really in disrespectful ways. And I feel like Balzac does not do that here. He presents them just as they are, in all their glory and in all their flaws. And I really, really loved that. I only read 10 books this month, and yet some of them were really thick, and some of them were, they have a lot to delve into. So if you've read these books, if you have any thoughts you want to share, please put them down below. I'm happy to talk about them. And tell me if you're a plot-driven reader or not, because I'm finding that I don't know how to describe myself now after reading all of these books that don't have a ton of plot, and that I just ended up enjoying them. It does still, I still love all the ones with plot, but now I might be even more all over the place than I normally am. So that is it. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.